because she was pushed into the grass and violated by an older man she knew. The girl, in utter despair, grabbed a stone and smashed him until he was unrecognizable, because her act was considered a retaliatory attack rather than self-defense, and with the body being too severely damaged along with no direct evidence proving assault. The court ultimately ruled that the girl was guilty of violent injury resulting in death. In the courtroom, her mute mother wept in heartbreaking agony. She could not understand why her well-behaved daughter had suddenly become a criminal condemned by everyone overnight. What she could not accept even more was that her daughter, clearly the victim, would still have to endure prison time. Just a few days earlier, her daughter Yoon-young had been a bright, outstanding teenager. Although the mother and daughter lived a modest life relying on each other, their days were filled with contentment. Because she could not speak, the mother often felt she might embarrass her daughter, yet Yoon-young patiently encouraged her every day, teaching her sign language without complaint. She thought this simple, peaceful life would go on forever, until one day, when she went to her mother's workplace to pick her up. The factory owners shattered their happiness. Yoon-young's striking beauty caught the attention of the lecherous boss, who began harboring improper thoughts about her. The next day at work, he brazenly made an outrageous request directly to Yoon-young's mother.
미성년자도 아닌데 졸업하기 전에 저한테 시집 보내세요. 나만한 남자 없는데 밤마다 즐겁게 해주고.
His arrogance and disrespect made the mother furious, and she slapped him hard across the face. Though she sternly warned him not to make jokes about her daughter, she had no idea this only fueled the twisted desires in his mind. That very afternoon, the man found out where Yoon-young worked part-time at a cafe. Pretending to be friendly, he was actually trying to learn what time she finished her shift. Watching her busy behind the counter, wearing a fitted dress that showed her slender legs, only intensified his predatory intent. That evening, when Yoon-young finished work, the man was already waiting along her usual route home. When Yoon-young regained consciousness, she found her clothes disheveled, her body showing signs of violation, and beside her was the factory boss, looking at her with a vile satisfaction.
엄마 걱정하시나 보다.
Meanwhile, Yoon-young's mother, alarmed that her daughter had not come home, hurried out to search for her. She kept calling her daughter's phone, but each time the man hung up, her daughter's unusual silence made her even more frantic, and she wandered the streets, calling out in a voiceless cry. As the mother drew closer, the man's depraved mind was once again driven by his evil urges.
갑자기 경숙 씨가 보고 싶네.
His menacing voice echoed in Yoon-young's ears, pushing her rage and instinct to protect her mother to the limit. She reached for a stone in the grass and, in a frenzy, struck the man again and again, once, twice, 3 times until he stopped breathing, his face and body beyond recognition. After regaining her composure, Yoon-young went to the police station to turn herself in. She did not hide what had happened and admitted that she had taken a life. But because there were no eyewitnesses and all the evidence came solely from Yoon-young, her claim of self-defense was inevitably doubted by everyone. In the end, the court ruled that the evidence is insufficient to classify this as self-defense, and convicted Yoon-young of intentional homicide, sentencing her to 5 years in prison with some leniency. When the mother learned through someone typing for her that her daughter had been sentenced, the weight of despair seemed to engulf the entire courtroom in an instant. She could not express her feelings in words at that moment. Apart from the searing pain in her heart, she could do nothing. Soon after, Yoon-young was transferred to prison. The ropes binding her and the heavy, locked iron bars made it clear, from now on, she had lost her freedom. Here, she was labeled inmate 2037 and taken into the 10th cell. There were 5 people in that room, each carrying their own burden of guilt. Soon Jae, who set fire to the drunk driver's family after her son was killed. Hae-soo, wearing the red death row uniform. Lee-ra, a former madam. Jang-mi, a beautiful woman hurt countless times by men. And Sarang, filled with deep resentment toward her father. Sarang's anger was especially fierce on Yoon-young's very first day in prison. She was beaten up by her, because Sarang had an emotional regulation disorder. The other inmates were already used to it. They simply applied ointment to Yoon-young's wounds and warned her, "Don't get too close to her in the future." That night, lying in the unfamiliar cell, Yoon-young's tears for her mother flowed endlessly. If it weren't for what happened, perhaps she would still be in her mother's arms, falling asleep peacefully. The next morning, everyone woke up early after breakfast. the inmates had to start their day's work. During the meal, when she heard Liara say, "The repair workshop is exhausting, but it pays the most," Yoon-young volunteered to go there. She wanted to earn more money to send to her mother, because after everything that had happened, her mother had lost her job, and she worried deeply about how her mother would survive. The workshop had stricter management, and the work was hot and tiring. As a newcomer, she received a stern warning from the prison guard on her very first day, but thanks to the help and care of a few inmates, she soon managed to handle some simple chores. Finally, after making it through the afternoon, she raised her hand to ask, "How much is today's pay?"
여기가 사회야? 따박따박 임금 갖다 바치게? 피땀으로 거둔 국민 세금이 당신들 첫 쓰시라고 나오는 줄 알아?
Only to be scolded again by the guard. The blows from the outside world made it even harder for Yoon-young to breathe. That night, after all the other inmates had fallen asleep, she alone lay awake. Seeing how pitiful she looked, Soon Jae came over to comfort her, like a warm family member. Soon Jae used her own tragic story to encourage her. "You have to be strong and keep going."
아들이 하나 있었다. 음주운전을 한 차가 내 새끼 죽이고 도망을 친 거야. 그래서 내가 어떻게 했는 줄 아나? 나중에 자수한 그놈 집에 불을 질렀다. 근데 내 때문에 5 식구가 다 타 죽었단다. 혼자 끌어앉지 말고 편지를 쓰든 기도를 하든 뭐라도 뱉어내야 살 수가 있다.
Perhaps with the guidance of this big sister, Yoon-young began to accept her new reality. She began writing letters to her mother, using them to ease her longing. Gradually, with this outlet for her emotions, Yoon-young stopped giving in to despair. She focused more on her work and soon adapted to life behind bars. Meanwhile, her mother was enduring even deeper pain than Yoon-young. Every day, she missed her daughter in lonely silence. When the long-awaited visitation day finally came, before seeing her daughter, she hid in the restroom, practicing her speech again and again. She wanted to tell her, "I'm doing fine," but the moment her daughter appeared, all her careful practice fell apart.
엄마, 힘들게 여기까지 왜 왔어?
엄마, 건강하게 잘 지내고 있어.
For a mother who had never been able to speak to learn just for her daughter, the effort and determination were beyond measure. All they had ever wished for was a simple, peaceful life. Yet even that small dream had been shattered by cruelty. Now, all they could do was wait for the 5 years of darkness to pass. But reality is never kind to the vulnerable. After a sudden illness, Yoon-young received a piece of news that struck her like a thunderbolt. She was carrying the child of the person who had wronged her. In that instant, the fragile defenses she had built crumbled completely. Unable to accept the truth, she ran toward the prison gates in desperation. She only wanted to go home, to see her mother. Because of her escape attempt, she was placed in solitary confinement, with her hands restrained to prevent self-harm. Due to the nature of her conviction, the law required her to carry the pregnancy to term. When Soon Jae came to bring her out a few days later, the sight was heartbreaking. Marks covered her stomach, evidence of her rejection of the life growing inside her. Her suffering moved the other inmates, who each offered her comfort in their own way. But after leaving solitary, Yoon-young stopped eating and refused to see her mother. Her mother was turned away again and again, sensing something was terribly wrong, yet powerless to help while they were in separate worlds. One day, on the way to the workshop, Yoon-young seized a chance, grabbed a piece of glass, and injured herself. The scene was witnessed by Sarang, whose volatile temper flared once more. This time, for attacking someone who was pregnant, Sarang was sent to solitary confinement. To care for the pregnant Yoon-young, the prison guards arranged for her to do lighter work, and several of her cellmates comforted her every day, trying every possible way to steer her away from thoughts of ending her life, even planning to help her appeal her case again, because if she could be recognized as having become pregnant from an assault, she could legally undergo a termination procedure.
재심 청구에 기대를 해보자. 국민 참여 재판도 신청하면 그분들하고 판사님들하고 네 마음 알아주실 기다. 그러면 성폭력에 의한 낙태 수술 허용 이것도 가능하고.
그래, 그러니까 막 배 때리고 자하고 그러지 마.
하지 마 좀. 재판.
During one work assignment not long after, sharp pain in her abdomen sent Yoon-young back to the infirmary. That day, she also learned that the baby inside her was already 6 months along, but instead of joy, she felt only despair laced with anger at the thought of this new life. As the days passed, Yoon-young finally reached the date for her retrial. With new evidence submitted and public opinion spreading, the judge was forced to make a new ruling on the case.
그 형을 감경할 수 있다. 하지만 상해 치사가 인정되는 바 피고 정윤영에게 징역 1년을 선고한다.
Although her sentence was reduced by 4 years, Yoon-young still felt no joy, as the child growing inside her remained her constant nightmare. Her cellmates, wanting to celebrate her upcoming freedom, had even prepared new clothes for her baby well in advance. But for Yoon-young, all of this was just silent torment, over and over again. While everyone thought she had stepped out of the shadows and was ready to face life again, deep down she had never once accepted this child. One day not long after, Yoon-young claimed she felt splitting headaches every day, hoping the infirmary would give her painkillers. But after receiving the medicine, she didn't take it. Instead, she secretly hid them in a jar in the corner. As her visits to the infirmary became more frequent, the doctor began to notice something unusual about her.
혹시 약 먹으니?
아니에요. 진짜 아파서 그래요.
Although suspicious, the doctor saw Yoon-young's seemingly innocent face and didn't think much more of it, not realizing that this moment of inattention would soon lead to a heartbreaking tragedy. A month later, the day finally came when Yoon-young's water broke, but instead of immediately seeking help from the guards, she endured the intense pain and took out the painkillers she had hidden away. Her body trembling, fighting through the sadness, she shoved the pills into her mouth one after another. The pain had already drained all her strength to resist, but she still forced herself to push a bundle of letters outside her final attachment, a farewell to her mother and her cellmates. Even until this moment, she could not accept the child in her womb, and even in the face of death, she refused to bring this child into the world. By the time someone found her, Yoon-young was already on the brink of death. In the emergency room, the doctors fought with all their might to save her, but for someone who no longer wished to live, how could she want to wake up? Meanwhile, her cellmates anxiously waited for news about Yoon-young, only to be met with a thick stack of letters instead.
돌아오지 못할까봐 이렇게 편지 남겨요. 다친 마음을 선생님께서 먼저 어루만져 주시고 그동안 살아갈 수 있었습니다. 너무 감사하고 또 죄송해요. 사람들한테 우리 언니라고 자랑하고 싶을 만큼 언닌 좋은 사람이에요. 하루라도 언니한테 칭얼거리다 떠나고 싶었는데 미안해요.
In the end, Yoon-young didn't make it, or rather, it was that she had already let go of the will to survive. She had fought back against her attacker, taken his life in self-defense, only to be imprisoned and forced to carry his child. With no chance to overturn the ruling, it was the limits of the law, and the crushing weight of certain people's words, that made it impossible for her to end the pregnancy. These were also the forces that step by step broke down a young girl who had only her disabled mother to rely on. Defending herself against an assault wasn't even recognized as self-defense, yet she was still required to give birth to her attacker's child, a glimpse into how unreasonable the laws could be. Although as of January 1, 2021, the termination ban was abolished, the young women who had been assaulted and forced into pregnancy before that day were left to carry the shadow for the rest of their lives. Some things can be erased by time or replaced by new memories, but some pain truly stays with a person until the very end.